We have in Colombia the challenge to define the agricultural frontier, especially as we are going through a peace process. The most critical ecosystems in Colombia are located exactly where we need to stabilize populations so that actually mafias and crime, organized crime, do not end up ruining all the critical ecosystems. How do you create an economy that, rather than destroying systematically biodiversity, on the contrary, produces systematically biodiversity? For us to stabilize that agricultural frontier and also, on the other hand, stop this organized crime that is destroying the ecosystems, we need to work with the peasants and have a very strong social pact where we are able to create an economy within that frontier that is able to use biodiversity and where the main benefits are for those communities, that they can feel included, and that they can feel proud that they are the main actors. I am talking about the Amazon, I'm talking about the biodiverse Pacific area in Colombia, where they feel they are the main actors in restoring nature, but at the same time stopping land conversion from forest to this agricultural frontier, or this illegal mining or coca crops for cocaine frontier. And that is absolutely strategic. But the key thing is, how do you create that economy where the main benefits are for those communities? This is one of the critical things. And this will require, in many of the critical ecosystems in Colombia, an absolute commitment of the government for at least 20 years to be able to create this ecological restoration process and stopping land degradation with these communities. In Colombia, three main actors: peasant communities, indigenous communities, and Black communities that live in these ecosystems. And finally, I don't think that we're going to stop this deforestation if we think that the forest is only a carbon sink. And if we give that to markets, what we need is a governance pact with multiple incomes and outcomes, a biodiversity economy much more complex, where there is a new type of partnership. We call it PPP, but it's not a public-private partnership. It's a public-people's partnership that creates that governance, and then with that governance we can include the private sector to contribute. If we don't get that governance, what we can be facing in the name of climate change, in the name of saving the forest, in the name of the challenge of sustaining very ecologically complex and culturally complex ecosystems like the Amazon, we could end up in another wave of extractivism. Call it carbon credit, call it genetic resources, call it different things, and I think this needs to be well thought and well governed.
You're talking about carbon credits skeptically?
I think if there is not the proper governance, and we're seeing now the proper regulation, and the and the question of who are the beneficiaries of these carbon credits, it could really end up in a very large financial speculation process, with the beneficiaries being intermediaries and not the communities or the forest itself. Carbon credit companies that sign deals with communities, with contracts that sometimes don't even have a very strong legal basis. And then these communities end up actually giving up their land. And indigenous community land in Colombia is protected. I'm not saying this is the common case.
Right.
I'm showing that if we don't have regulation, clear rules, governance, and clarity of how to do it, and also something as Minister of Environment that is important that I have seen in Colombia, is how these compensations are invested and if they are having environmental results. So we have a carbon tax. We are one of the few Latin American countries that have a carbon tax. And what happened is that many companies, for not paying the carbon tax, are compensating. We've been following up also public and private sector investment on compensations and restoration processes. And what we're seeing is that the results are not sustained. Only 10% of those investments have given us, we are seeing that the forest is being recovered. So that's why I said we need a governance, which includes the private sector. I am not banning on itself the potential of a carbon market, but I think it should be regulated, should have a strong governance process, and where we as ministers of environment of government can assure our constituents, our citizens, that those investments are going to give real, serious environmental results, that we are producing biodiversity, that we are securing water, that we are securing land, that we are solving environmental issues with scientifically proven and long-term sustenance. It's a challenge for the government. Right now, at least I'm talking for Colombia, this is not the case, and probably many good intentions and a lot of money has been invested that will not yield long-term results, and we need to put the structures in place so that we assure that they do. Actually, in Colombia now we are passing a law in Congress to reform the Constitution to recognize that peasant as similar to indigenous people, because we recognize they have a culture, they have a way of life, and they have produced 80% of our food without any commercial or industrial agriculture. They are our farmers. They are part of our nation. And that's different from agribusiness, which buys and has a lot of capital investment, buys a lot of land, makes a lot of monocul crops, and creates a different dynamic. Where is the food we eat coming from? And I think around 80% of the food we are eating comes actually from the traditional farmer, from the peasant that is attached to a tradition, ownership, and culture. And I think we should see that.
What is that law? How does that change that person's trajectory?
It will protect, it will recognize them as a special culture, similar to indigenous people and black communities in Colombia, that will entitle them probably to have peasants' reserves, because we are talking from what we call food sovereignty, which means that Colombia is able to produce and secure its food for its population and its water as a principle of being a nation. Then, if we have surplus, we can industrialize, we can export. But first, we have to protect our food and water for our population, especially on climate crisis. So when you see food in that way, water in that way, and land in that way, you are thinking in a different model of governance. It's not about a business. It's about sustaining your own population and the rights they have. Water as a right, food as a right, indigenous communities and culture also as a right. And in that situation, the land, I agree, the land ownership is very critical. We are now because of the internal conflict, we are coming very late, 21st century, to land reform. It's been done by violence in the past. Now we want to do a state land reform. And that also means in the forest, how we provide ownership without taking out the natural reserves in legal terms. So we are putting now into law the concession of use to peasants of the forest, but if they are able to sustain biodiversity. So it will be something like, yes, security of the land, but against a contract with the state where you secure biodiversity. And of course, I agree very much with you. We have to provide the credit, the knowledge, the capacity for these peasants. It's not something to the market. The state has a big responsibility, exactly, and we need to work it. The state has a responsibility to work on the land, to provide extension services, to put the research centers, and to bring, of course, the private sector as well. But we cannot, as state, just watch and think that the transition to a more ecological farming or the transition to a forestry and or biodiversity economy will happen on its own. So for us, actually, we are creating the extension service for reforestation, land restoration, and biodiversity, because it's something that the state has to work every day with that farmer in that change. And also, we are setting our public banks as a priority to invest in this biodiversity economy and this green economy. So public banks can play a role, and it's not also about the revenue of the bank, but it's about the end result that is part of the general policy. Public banks have a larger commitment to make economic policy happen. They are not, they don't need the profit. They need profit, of course, but profit is not the measurement of their success. The measurement of the success is that the policy of the government is implemented as well. Of course, the revenue margins could be less, but and because of that, they should be able to take further risks than maybe private or multilateral banking. And I think is underestimated, or in many countries have been dismantled. I think, at least in Colombia, we are strengthening the power of the public sector to be also a promoter of the economy, not only a regulator.